Hello again, and apologies for those technical issues that we are experimenting today. We're back to the session, Adapted Social Protection in the Development Agenda, and I want to give the floor straight away to Jean-Louis Lamour.
Yes, many thanks, and good morning to all. Okay, so I will then briefly introduce this topic through, as our moderator unfortunately cannot reach us at the moment. We're talking about adaptive social protection, and my understanding is it relates to the ways in which social protection can adapt, stretch, be flexible, increase, to address both the causes and the effects of climate change. To my perception, the stronger foundation for adaptive social protection is that it is social protection. Adaptive social protection belongs to the universal human right to social protection and to the way it is built in systems and norms. Just as a reference, I would like to share here a couple of links in reference to those norms and systems and notions. Next slide, please. I don't know if we have slides at the moment. But in any case, social protection, as referred to in those norms and systems set up by the ILO through the social dialogue process with the representatives of workers and employers, and governments is defined as a set of guarantees of branches of meant to protect all members of society throughout the life cycle, including during shocks, like, for example, with COVID-19, we saw that very clearly, but also in times of difficulties like displacements and transitions in general, and we can refer here to the transition to a green economy, the just transition. Social protection, as defined in this way, it can tackle inequality, which is a very important notion when it comes to climate change, because you know the notion of climate justice. So inequality is supposed to be increased by climate change, and so social protection is specifically built to try to reduce those inequalities through a different mechanism, and the most important one, the risk pooling and redistribution of social insurance. By the way, we have a study with one of our institution partner in this presentation, AFD, about this topic, social protection and social insurance and climate change. So it can tackle inequality. It can also tackle localized impact because it pools risks and resources between the rich and the poor, between the healthy and the sick, across generations. So it's a very powerful system and mechanism. Now, adaptive social protection is, as we said, no different than social protection. Its implementation is in fact based on a quite universal and flexible strategy of implementation, which is called the social protection floor strategy. It also refers to recommendations developed with the ILO, which is quite universally applied. And I send you the link here in the chat. So the social protection floor is a very important reference when it comes to talking about adaptive social protection. It is important as well to understand the challenge of social protection in the context of climate change and in general. Social protection is usually effective to protect people in a changing climate, but only half of the population is currently covered by social protection. And the financing gap, which relates to this coverage gap, is estimated at around $1.2 trillion worldwide. So to be fully effective against climate change, no doubt that social protections, those gaps in social protections have to be addressed. So probably next slide. Rather, kind of a conclusion and perspectives to better adapt to social protection to climate change. It is quite obvious that setting up adaptive mechanisms to expand the scope of social protection supporting climate change policies will require a very strong effort to integrate policies and operational strategies. Not only in terms of social policies, but also environmental policies, economic policies, and disaster risk reduction, for example, is a very good example because the Sendai framework and the anticipatory planning cycle combined with social dialogue that is actually designing social protection in countries provide a very strong methodological foundation to adapt social protection to the needs of people facing or vulnerable to climate change effects, including the transition to green economy and the fact that people are being laid off when this transition is taking place. It also emphasized the fact that social protection is not only about response to problems, it's also about building a culture of prevention, anticipation, and eventually transformation, because this is what we want. We want climate social protection to support as well a transformative process in the right sense, in the sense of a greener, more resilient society. So, it's also true when it comes to the humanitarian development nexus, when cash transfers are being linked to social protection. I can provide here an example of this in the world of work, which is a bit different from the humanitarian dimension. But during COVID, for example, a huge effort funded by Germany has supported workers across production chain in the garment industry in several countries, Ethiopia, Madagascar, etc. So it's very possible to find ways, new ways, innovative ways to fill those gaps, to meet those needs of those people, of the people affected by crisis, including climate change. Of course, another priority area when it comes to climate in relation to social protection is migration, climate migration, which is an emerging and increasing phenomenon around the world. And for that purpose, social protection has to develop policies within countries and across countries, across borders, to ensure the portability of the social security rights. And this is happening already. It has to be strengthened. As a conclusion, I would say we will hear later, after me, other examples of application of adaptive social protection, mainly, I believe, in context of disasters. But this is also true in context of professional transition, industrial transition from polluting, fossil fuel consuming industries towards greener industries. So this is, I think, the conclusion I would like to raise here is that the fact that integration of social and protection and climate policies and strategies is absolutely essential, not only to better manage disasters, but also to foster innovative practices. And this is, I think, a key word, to find new ways of doing things, new ways of collaborating, and to use evidence to do so, while taking into account specific vulnerabilities, to leave no one behind. This is really important because gender, because indigenous people, because all the people that would be otherwise, left out of this protection and these movements also towards a greener economy, well, they have to be protected. And therefore, certain work is to be done for that, inclusive approaches. And eventually, to finish, I would say that social protection is also there to promote transformative changes in the society. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Is it my turn? Yes. Yeah. Can I have my presentation, please? Yes. As an introduction, I was supposed to do this presentation in French, but I don't know if it's okay, or do you want me to follow in English because my slide is in French, sorry.
Ja, het is prima. Ja, ik ben beschikbaar, dus ik kan... Thank you, Jean-Louis. I'm sorry that I was able to join you only later. We had some problems with the federal network, and so of course this kind of stuff happens at the most unforeseen circumstances. But I was able to follow your presentation for the last part, which was quite interesting. I will now give the floor to Guillaume BOUVEYRON from AFD. He has a lot of experience in disaster risk reduction, and will make a link between the concept of adaptive social protection and the daily realities of projects in Haiti, in Lebanon, and etc. So I will no longer wait and give the floor to Guillaume.
Hi everyone, my name is Guillaume BOUVEYRON. I work for the French Development Agency. I'm based in Paris, and I'm a global lead for disaster risk reduction. Can I see my presentation, please? Yeah, and so my presentation is in French, but I will do it in English. Sorry for that. So my first idea was to give you more example about what is disaster risk reduction and climate change, and how we can link disaster risk reduction and climate change. At the beginning, I think it's important for me to tell you that the aim of disaster preparedness is to reduce the impact of disaster risk reduction by implementing prevention activity and also disaster preparedness activity. So the main objective of disaster risk reduction is to limit the impact of the disaster by implementing activities or avoid the disaster. And what you should also know, and when we talk about disaster risk reduction, the idea is to tackle different kind of risks. The main family risk is a natural risk. So in this family, you have risks that are linked with telluric risk that are like, for example, volcano, earthquakes. And then the other family that is in green is my presentation is all the risks that are relating with the weather or hydrometeorological risk. And the last one for the natural risk is the biological risk, and that is part of this family. And then you also have the industrial risk, like, for example, the blast that happened in Lebanon. What I'm talking about that kind of risk, it's because there is a link between disaster risk reduction and climate change, because the risk that are in the family of the hydrometeorological risk can be increased by the climate change, and this is why we should focus this time. And when for this presentation, the main idea is to focus in that risk. Next slide, please. And then, because I was able to link disaster risk reduction and climate change using the risks that are linked with weather, the focus of this slide is to tell you that risk reduction and social protection are linked, but this collaboration is recent, but I think that it will, if we improve this collaboration, we'll be able to have like a better intervention. Why disaster risk reduction and social protection are linked? Because both thematic aim to reduce the impact of crisis, and also they are here to build and reinforce the resilience of the population. But also because both thematic are here to tackle climate disaster or epidemic, as I said before. I will give you an example in how we can work closely using disaster risk reduction component and social protection component. For example, when we are identifying an area that is prone to disaster, we are conducting a risk assessment evaluation to identify more specifically where is the area, for example, of a city that is prone to disaster. And then if we combine this analysis with social protection activities, the idea is to go deeply in the population that are living in this area that is prone to disaster in order to identify where are the most vulnerable. And the idea of this collaboration is to be able, in case of disaster, to identify by developing social protection activity and to identify the person that are more on need after a disaster. And then I will go through my example, please. Next slide. Yes, the idea of this slide is to give you a concrete example in how climate change, disaster risk reduction, and social protection can be linked. The AFD in 2020, with the help of Danida, the Danish agency, decided to finance a project in Lebanon, and it was after an emergency, a flood in the governorate of La Bekaa, that is close to Syria. And why this example is interesting is because we identified with my colleagues from the climate department that in this area of the world, climate change is directly influencing the weather by creating more floods in November and in December. And the objective of this project is to help with the support of our partner, the Solidarité Internationale, and the Lebanese and French Red Cross to implement activities at local level that will help Lebanese people and Syrian refugees to be able to be more prepared in dealing with an eventual other disaster. So for us, this project is 100% climate and 100% adaptation, because we will promote an activity that will help to reduce the impact of a disaster that is directly connected to the climate change. And my last sentence will be, for the moment, this project is not known and labelized as a social protection, adaptative social protection project, because this aspect was not analyzed in the beginning, but because in this project there is contingency budget, meaning that if there is an emergency, during the implementation phase, of the project, we will be able to, using by, for example, cash transfer, help people that will be more vulnerable regarding to floods. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope that it will help and interest. If you need further information, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Guillaume. I will now pass the floor to Veronica Zamudia, who is an expert in at the Inter-American Conference on Social Security, CIIS, and she's specialized in social risks linked to climate change, such as disaster due to threats of natural origin, as well as into preparation and response of health services in case of emergencies and disasters. And so she's in charge of the disaster risk research line at the Inter-American Conference on Social Security. So she will be able to give you a view from the Latin American perspective. Veronica, you have the floor.
Hola, hola. Buenas tardes. Voy a permitirme presentar en español, aunque mis láminas están en inglés, para facilitar su comprensión. Can I see my slides, please? Okay. No. Ok. Bueno, mis compañeros, los colegas, han presentado en este momento de qué viene esto de la protección social adaptativa, ¿sí? Hemos visto en qué consiste y cuál es su potencial para fortalecer la resiliencia ante el riesgo de desastres. Es importante señalar que la protección social abarca de manera amplia diferentes mecanismos de redes de protección, como son las contributivas por medio de la seguridad social, pero también aquellas que no son contributivas por medio de políticas sociales que han sido impulsadas por los gobiernos centrales. Al decir esto, quiero señalar que la protección social adaptativa tiene este potencial que estoy señalando siempre y cuando esté acompañada de un enfoque de derechos humanos. ¿Por qué? Porque la seguridad social, que clásicamente se considera o se detecta dentro del rubro de esta seguridad social contributiva, ha sido reconocida como un derecho humano y se basa en una serie de ramas de protección que podemos identificar como un respaldo para poder impulsar ciertos programas, por ejemplo, de transferencias monetarias, de diferentes servicios también, servicios sociales básicos, que son elementales al momento de la recuperación del bienestar de la población. Es así que la propuesta que hacemos desde la Conferencia Interamericana de Seguridad Social respecto a esta protección social adaptativa es acercarnos hacia la gestión de los riesgos. Es decir, no estamos hablando de choques climáticos que nos llegan del exterior, de nuestros sistemas económicos, de nuestros sistemas sociales, sino que los riesgos son construidos socialmente y socialmente es como se abordan. Es decir, hemos planteado una triada de la gestión del riesgo de desastres en la cual participa protección civil, pero también los sistemas de gestión de riesgos y la protección social. Es decir, tres elementos fundamentales que al momento de participar de manera integral es posible plantear una reducción de riesgos de desastres. En este caso, particularmente, la protección social y la seguridad social tienen el potencial de resguardar la vida digna de las personas. No solamente cuando ha sucedido una catástrofe, sino de forma preventiva. Es decir, esta seguridad social permite el acceso a infraestructuras críticas y a servicios básicos elementales para la recuperación en situaciones de desastre. Y la seguridad social cuenta, específicamente en el caso de América, cuenta con una expertise ya de años para poder enfrentar estos riesgos, específicamente en el área de la salud, lo cual nos parece que es bastante valioso porque permite retomar un gran número de experiencias de las diferentes instituciones de seguridad social que prestan de forma directa estos servicios de salud. Y quiero mencionar específicamente en el caso mexicano del Instituto Mexicano del Seguro Social, en el cual se ha desarrollado una herramienta informática, tecnológica, que se trata de un sistema de comunicación y coordinación en caso de emergencias en salud y desastres, que permite la comunicación en tiempo real y el respaldo y el acompañamiento de los COE, es decir, los comités de operación de emergencias. Y esta comunicación en tiempo real lo que ha permitido en el caso mexicano es la reducción de víctimas, la reducción también de costos y el poder regresar de forma inmediata o lo más pronto posible a la normalidad. Este sistema informático se encuentra conectado con el Centro Nacional de Prevención de Desastres, es decir, hay un acercamiento directo con quienes están monitoreando los diferentes fenómenos naturales. Y bueno, a la fecha podemos hablar que este Centro Virtual de Operaciones en Emergencias y Desastres ha atendido en promedio 3.261 eventos relacionados con diferentes amenazas de origen natural, como son geológicas, hidrometeorológicas y otras más. Esto durante el periodo de 2010-2018. En el caso de la pandemia por COVID-19, lo que hemos observado es que este sistema ha funcionado para dar respuesta respecto a la disponibilidad de ventiladores, de camas hospitalarias, es decir, permite reorganizar la disponibilidad de los recursos materiales, del personal, poder responder de manera inmediata, y consideramos que dentro de este potencial de la protección social adaptativa, específicamente este tipo de proyectos como del Centro Virtual de Operaciones puede ser compartido como una experiencia con esta posibilidad de adaptarse en diferentes instituciones, no solamente que presten servicios de salud, sino también aquellas que prestan, por ejemplo, diferentes prestaciones, referidas a las diferentes ramas de la seguridad social. Es así que es importante para mí cerrar esta presentación señalando que la protección social adaptativa es una alternativa para poder fortalecer esta resiliencia ante el riesgo de desastres, sí, y siempre y cuando se considere este enfoque de derechos y a su vez siempre se esté buscando la forma de garantizar en todo momento lo que son las prestaciones y los servicios a las personas afiliadas y beneficiarias de la seguridad social. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I think something went wrong with your PowerPoint presentation, but I'm sure that it can be downloaded afterwards for those that are interested. I give now the floor to another colleague from AFD, Carlos Soto Iguaran. He's an expert team leader at Agence Française de Développement, and he will also give more specific examples from Bangladesh and the Sahel. I now give the floor to Carlos.
Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. My name is Carlos Soto and I work at the Health and Social Protection Division at Agence Française de Développement. And my presentation is about the adaptive social protection agenda at AFD. So I see that my presentation is not on, but anyway, the first point I would like to highlight, as you can see in the chart on the left, is that since 2015, the financial commitment in the area of social protection has been increasing yearly, reaching more than 175 million euros in 2019. More than 25% of these commitments were in projects in social systems and strengthening of SP systems. Also, to tackle the economic and social consequences of COVID-19, the agency committed in 2020 more than 700 million to finance, in particular, cash transfers programs in response to the crisis. Even if these programs were not in response to a climate shock, the combination of rapid financial support with technical assistance to support long-term reforms has contributed to make SP systems more adaptive, that is, more reactive and more flexible, so that they are in a better position for future response to any type of COVID shock. The second important point is that we operationalize the ASP approach by working with other technical divisions within the agency. ASP is a multidimensional concept and requires a transversal approach, bringing together different expertise in the area of development. That is why we work closely together with the climate division in charge of assessing the impact and mitigation and adaptation of our projects, and also with the crisis and conflict division that works in very fragile states and context, and among others in the field of disaster risk management, as Guillaume was presenting. And finally, the funding we mobilize in support to ASP projects is increasing. We work closely with other development partners to co-finance this type of projects, and we also try to move forward this agenda through policy papers, concept notes, and participating in expert meetings. Next slide, please. So, next slide. Okay, so I propose briefly to present two ASP project examples. The first one is in the Sahel, where more than 40% of households report suffering from climate shocks. These impacts are more widespread among poor and rural households, which have to resort in negative coping strategies, such as taking children out of school, for instance. With the World Bank and other donors, we're supporting the ASP in 3 countries in particular, Chad, Mali, and Mauritania. And the program focuses on the establishment of social safety nets for the poor and those who are at risk of becoming poor because of climate shock. The program has helped improve the institutional coordination, develop information and data analysis, and the program delivery chain that you can see on the slide. In Mauritania, for instance, AFD funding will contribute to the extension and update of the social registry and to the development of economic inclusion of beneficiaries. If the assessment, the enrollment of households and individuals, and the provision of benefits are improved, the country is better equipped to address the materialization of early hazards. One important feature of these programs is the link they establish with early warning systems that provide information used to trigger early social protection actions. This could be cash or in-kind support. And the trigger is then it takes place when a pre-established threshold is met, for instance, a rainfall index. And by linking early warning systems to SP programs, the response plans can be deployed in the event of any shock. Secondly, in Bangladesh, which is also a country prone to disaster, AFD is co-financing a World Bank-led project whose objective is to improve the transparency and efficiency of cash transfers programs. And it tackles, among other challenges, the lack of poor targeting and outdated administrative systems. If we look again to the delivery chain, the program improved the intake and registration of beneficiaries by increasing the number of access points for applications, allow better enrollment decisions by using their poverty score, or facilitates the delivery of benefits by expanding digital payments. The CTM program, as it's called, does not target vulnerable population to climate change. However, by strengthening the social protection system, it enhances the overall resilience to various shocks and risks. In addition, AFD is mobilizing technical assistance in Bangladesh to train and synthesize ministries in charge of SP, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk management policies to develop ASP strategies and to develop tools such as a vulnerability index to facilitate prevention and planned response to natural disaster. So I will finish by saying that this is how we are contributing to this agenda at AFD, and we're willing to provide more funding and more technical assistance in the coming year to move forward a climate-sensitive universal social protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos, for your presentation. I think we have a short time for a question, and I think the main question I would like to ask is, you know, the Saussure facility is a demand-driven facility that provides European expertise on social protection and employment policies. And so within this context, how do you see the possibility for Saussure to contribute to help with respect to adaptive social protection, and especially now where we are already seeing in many countries the concrete results of climate change. So how do you see that European expertise can be made useful within this context? Maybe Jean-Louis, you have...
Yes, Koen, of course, I can answer the question with pleasure. Well, my question would be more a challenge, in fact, or I would like to challenge a bit this too obvious connection between the climate problematic and disasters. Because we talk about adaptive social protection. This is a quality of social protection, basically, as very well put by Veronica. So yes, there is a link with disaster risk reduction, obviously, but instead of building only capacities to respond, which is very much the historical beginning point of adaptive social protection, we should now think about a social protection and a society altogether, much broadly, you know, much more broadly. What kind of society do we want to build to fight climate change, and what should be social protection like in that society? So yes, we can, of course, always think of mechanisms that are tactical, basically, to address shocks and to expand, to transfer cash and to target affected populations and things like that. This is already happening, and there is a community of practitioners who are trying actually to make those connections more coherent, you know, systemic-wise. But in the long run, it's about system building. It's about society building. So what do we want social protection to promote in terms of resilience, in terms of, how would I say, pillars, you know, principles that we want to promote? Environmental services, I mean, we call them services, but in fact, a better environment that can protect us is a way to address as well adaptive social protection. Social protection should be adapted to the needs that will arise a long time, you know, to social protection. So my answer to your question would be to dig into those needs, current and future, not only in terms of disaster response or disaster risk management, but life cycle risk management along, you know, the evolution of the society in 10 years' time, in 50 years' time.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think, well, we have to conclude now, I'm afraid. But I think the main lesson is that social protection has an important role to play within the context of climate change. It has in history of building adaptive capacity in the countries. So it's not a luxury, it's really an investment in adaptive capacity of all the countries involved. And so it has a curriculum of assisting economies in restructuring in order to adapt to new circumstances. And I think climate change is not different in that respect. So social protection can play a really important role together with employment policies to address these issues, to help countries restructure their economies, and in the case of structural impact of climate change, and in the case of the climate change related disasters and events, I think social protection can play really an important role in capacity building, in making systems and populations more resilient. And I think that is something that also the development community and the disaster risk reduction specialists have to take into account more structurally, so that we can the way that we can contribute from the perspective of social protection. So I think it's an important challenge for the future. I also want to conclude with the fact that we had this lab debate today, but we will also make a report on the subject later this year. So the idea is that we will also try to link the idea of adaptive social protection to social protection, and we will apply the lessons learned through the socio projects and also from other projects. We will make that available in a report later this year. So I thank you very much all for all the contributors for their very interesting contributions. I also thank the people present and the organizers, and my apologies for the technical difficulties that we experienced during the debate. Have a nice lunch.